In this lesson, we're going to be using our swing animation preset and also trim paths to bring on the next part of our message. Okay, so the next part of our message is that there are things that can be done to stop the destruction. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll type that out. There are things that can be done to... And then let's go ahead and bump the next part onto another line because that's getting kind of long. Stop the destruction. Okay, so since this says stop in it, I definitely want to use that red color. So we'll go ahead, color pick that. Let's make this a little more bold than it is. So we'll grab that as bold. Let's have this be kind of that lighter blue color, the teal that we have there. And I'm going to change this back to Garamond. Adobe Garamond. And let's have this be lowercase. And maybe even give it a italic. Maybe a bold italic. Okay, so once you're happy with the way that looks, let's go ahead and just get this into place. So I'm going to center this, make this one just a little bit bigger so that it fits underneath that first line, just scaling that up. Maybe scoot this one over just a bit there. And I also want to use the arrow that we have in our infographic split comp. So let's go over here. We have this little arrow up here. So we'll grab that, hit Control C to copy it. Let's go back into our main Coral infographic and come up here to the top, and we'll hit Control V to paste the arrow. Now it's not going to be quite long enough, so let's just bring this over here, extend it out. And we can scale that up a little bit. It's pretty small right now. Just bring that into the middle. Keep scaling it up until it fits in that line width. And let's go ahead and turn on its continuously rasterized just to see what it looks like. Perfect. So now, if you wanted to, maybe you could close this up a little bit. We don't need maybe quite so big of a gap. And then we'll just distribute that back out. Okay, so this is looking really nice. And now I'm ready to animate this kind of as he starts talking. So let's just scrub to listen. Right when he starts to say there, right here, this is where I want to add this. So I'm going to go ahead and make both of these 3D layers, turn on their motion blur, and I'm going to hit Alt open bracket to trim. And stop the destruction is going to come a little later, so I'm going to scoot that one over so we only see there are things that can be done too. And let's go over to our effects and presets, and we'll type in swing. We've got our user preset for swing right there. And just make sure your current time indicator is where you want those keyframes to start. So I have it right at the beginning of my layer. And we'll just drag that on. Now right now, it looks like it's popping up because of where the anchor point is sitting. So let's go ahead and move that to the top. So it looks like it swings down. Just like that. And let's just go ahead and fix our other layer too, because I'm going to use the same preset for that one as well. Okay. Now when we scrub, perfect. Okay, so right about here he starts to say stop. So let's go ahead and add our preset to that one as well. Now that changed my scale a little bit by changing that, so let's go ahead and scale it back up. just so it fits that same width.
There are things that can be done to stop the destruction.
Great. So now I want to use the trim paths to animate this arrow. So I'm going to grab the arrow and pull it down right in between here. And I want that arrow to start animating just after this is kind of swung down. So we can trim that, hit Alt, open bracket. And to use trim paths, we need this to be an After Effects shape layer. So I'll right click the arrow, create shapes from vector layer, and we'll just delete that original Illustrator layer. And let's open this up. Now I need to change up a little bit of what we have going on here. So we've got three groups. We have one for the tail, one for the tip of the arrow, and one for the line. So you can see that if I turn those on and off, we've got some different things to work with. I want the line to be on its own layer. So what we'll do is come up here, go to Layer, New Shape Layer, and I'll just drag that back down right there. We'll hit Alt, open bracket to trim it to that point. And group 3 is the one we want. So just select that from the shape that it's in right now. Hit Control X to cut it. And come up here to your shape layer 1 and hit Control V to paste it. Now it's going to give you just a little bit of an issue with the scale being different. So we can change that really easily. Turn that up to 245. I just brought up the scale for both of those. And then let's go back into the arrow outlines and turn back on the contents of those other two groups. So now we can see where to place this line to get it back into position. So I'm just nudging that with my arrow keys. Perfect. So now that is back in place. Okay, so let's go ahead and animate our arrow using trim paths. So I'm going to come over here to where we have the arrow outlines and select group 1. Then we'll go to add and hit trim paths. And what this does is it adds the trim paths between the groups because I selected group 1 instead of just having the whole layer selected. So now that is only going to reveal the one part of it. So we won't be revealing the whole thing using trim paths or using one trim paths effect. So if I take this down to about, let's see, 67%, you can see this one's just for the arrowhead because it's group 1. Now let's do one for group 2. So I'll select group 2, come up here to add, and go down to trim paths. And then we can take that down to about halfway, and you can see that's sort of coming on right there. So this just makes it a little bit easier to have the arrowheads and tail animated separately. So let's just Control Scrub to listen. So right about here is where we want the arrow tail to start. So I'm going to come back up here to trim paths right there, and we'll take this down to 0, set a keyframe, then let's move forward, let's say 5 frames. And then we'll take that up to 100. And I'm just going to do a really quick RAM preview just to watch that. Just hit the 0 key to let that come in there.
View. But there are things that can...
Okay, so you can see that comes on really quickly, which is what I want. Then, once that's finished, we'll have the line animate on. So let's go up to that line, which is going to be actually down. So we'll grab that, bring that down so we can see add, give it some trim paths, and then I'm going to take it down to 0, set a keyframe, and let's give this 10 frames to come on. And we'll take that up to 100. And then right whenever this starts to finish up, we'll give our second piece, the arrowhead, its animation. So I'll take this down to 0, hit end, move forward 5 frames just so it's the same duration as the tail, and then take this up to 100. Okay, so let's do a rain preview just to watch that through.
View. But there are things that can view. But there are things that can view. But
perfect. So the only thing I want to change is maybe the speed of this line. The line feels like it's moving really quickly all the way through and then it just abruptly stops. So we'll go ahead and select that shape layer. Come down here and let's select that second keyframe and give it an easy E. So I'll hit F9 and we'll go into our graph editor and pull out that handle. Now let's watch our rain preview again, and you can see it's going to really slow in towards the end here.
View. But there are things that can view. But there are things that can.
Great. So now I'm going to turn on motion blur for those two layers. And now any kind of secondary movement that we have will have motion blur on it. Things that can be done to, and let's go ahead and have stop the destruction. Let's make sure that comes on at the right time.
Can be done to stop the
great. So we just watched that all the way through.
view. But there are things that can be done to stop the view. But there are things that can be done to stop the destruction.
Perfect. So now that that text is animated on, I want to add a little bit more interest to this by putting some coral down here at the bottom. So we're going to animate that coral on in our next lesson and just use a scale animation, just the same thing we've been using all along, just to bring that on and have it kind of look like it just grows up from the bottom. So we'll be doing that in our next lesson.